The topic for this evening is a most vital use of your time. I particularly wanted to talk a little bit and think a little bit about one way that we can spend time that might not be as obvious. It might be a little counterintuitive of how we spend time, but I hope by the end of what I share, you'll see, yeah, there's some real value. So what I want to talk about is time spent not doing what you do. And I always hope that the time we spend together is a blessing in your church leadership, but in many other parts of your life. So this might count for your job, this might count for your family, this might count for other volunteer activities. It's stepping back from what you normally do intentionally to grow and learn. And I'm going to share a couple of different ideas. You may have heard of this concept in numerous different ways by different titles, and the different ways that I've heard it described through the years, each one probably adds a little bit of value to this idea of not doing what you normally do. So one way to describe this is balcony time. The author Mark DeVries, who wrote the book Sustainable Youth Ministry, and when I read that section I went, yep, I know about that, and a very valuable way of thinking about things, to step away from ground level and go up on the balcony, which gives you a different perspective. A great way to think about this might be for a sports team. You're probably aware that many coaches will either themselves occasionally go up where they can see the field from above, or they'll send an assistant coach up there, especially in the modern communication age, who's in contact via radio with the coach where he can interact with the players. And that's because when you get a higher view of a football game, a soccer game, basketball game, you get a different perspective. The idea of balcony time is stepping away so that you can look down and see what's happening from a much broader view. There's a value in stepping away to get that larger view. So balcony time. Another way to think about this might be dream time. That's stepping away to dream and think. I think one of the first times I ever heard about this, it was attributed to, I don't know if they used the term dream time, but I think it was Bill Gates. When he was still the head of Microsoft, would intentionally spend some time stepping back from running, the amazing company Microsoft, and he would spend some time dreaming, he would spend some time learning, he would read things that had nothing to do with computers, just to kind of keep in touch what was happening with society. It would give him a different perspective, so then he could re-engage with, in his case, the business Microsoft, with a different perspective, having dreamed and imagined what was possible. It brought to mind a Punnett Square that you may have seen. It became most well known in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, although he actually took the idea from Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower talked about how in our day, in how we spend our day, there are things that are important and unimportant, and there are things that are urgent and not urgent. And he noted, Covey did in his book, and as I say, stole it from Eisenhower, that a lot of our day often ends up doing the things that are urgent, important and not important. But Covey encouraged the readers of his book to try and focus on the second quadrant, to look for those things that don't cry out to be done, but which are important, which have value. So it's that stepping away and saying, okay, what things, they're not going to cry out for my attention, but stepping away and working on them are really going to add value to whatever I do, in volunteer, at work, at church, in your home. There are always things that are important, but not urgent. Or another way to think about this might be margin. The idea of margin. We all know that life is very, very busy. It's easy for our days and our hours and our minutes to become full of all kinds of things. And some folks have started writing about creating more margin. One of the ones that I've really appreciated who writes on and talks about margin is a man named Michael Hyatt. Has a great blog and a lot of free podcasts and a lot of things that are very helpful. And he describes that without margin, without some of that stepping away and just kind of being apart from what we normally do, that can harm our careers. He notes that studies have been done and that there's a point at which in your career, if you work too much, you actually become less productive. So I think that that's usually around the 55, 60 hours a week place where you actually become less productive than if you work more hours. That's something that some folks need to work on, that you're less productive when you work too much. Or he goes on to say that that can be detrimental to your physical health, can be detrimental to your emotional health. We all know that that can be damaging to our families if we're super engaged in whatever we do, whether that's ministry at church or a work or a volunteer activity. And he ultimately says it can damage your legacy. It can damage what you accomplish over the course of your lifetime if you don't give yourself some margin. Or one other way that you might think about the stepping back is sabbatical, which of course comes from the word Sabbath. Now, this doesn't replace the idea of spending the Sabbath with God, but the idea of stepping away to be closer to God, to be more connected with God, has great value as well. Sometimes for me, that means just going for a walk or driving without any distraction and using that time to talk to God, to listen to God, to pray out loud or silently, to make that stepping away time with God. So one of the things I thought that might be helpful just to help you consolidate or think through this idea of stepping away is to give you a couple of questions. And each of these tie to one of the other concepts that I've been describing. To ask the question, how are things going? You know, in, again, your work, in your family, in a volunteer activity, in a ministry at church, just step away. How are things going? How are things going? And to answer that and wrestle with what you find to be the answer in that. Another way to do that is, what should I focus on? What needs some attention? What could I work on? Which is important, but not urgent. It's not going to cry out for it, but what really adds value in my home, in a volunteer activity, in my workplace, here at church, what's really important, but it's not going to run to the forefront unless I take the time to make it at the forefront. Or in the idea of margin, what do I need to learn or do differently? What needs to be different about my own activities and my own behavior and what I'm used to doing? What do I need to change about me in order to do better, whatever it is that I do? Or, as I said, a great question, I think, is, God, what do you want to tell me? I think we all know that life is so busy that we sometimes just don't give God time to speak into our lives. We're often just so busy and so involved in whatever it is we're involved in, and all that stuff is good, that we don't have a chance to listen to God. So I think sometimes just asking the question in that little bit of balcony time, margin time, whatever you call that time, God, what do you want to tell me? What do I need to hear from you? So I particularly shared this coming into summer, where I think that's a great time to build some of that. You know, it's beautiful outside, and to go for that walk, to sit out in a garden, to go for the bike ride, to take the drive with the windows down and, you know, no radio or, you know, other distractions, and just ask some of those questions and reflect, again, in whatever areas you need to ask that.